Really quick, everybody, this entire video will be timestamped, so if you don't want to watch the whole thing and just get straight into a different fight, please check the pinned comment or the little red bar right down below you. Again, this entire video will be timestamped, and I'd appreciate you guys watching whatever part you'd like to. If you're sticking around, guys, hello, everybody, and welcome back to another video. If you are new here, my name is Kyle. I'm your guy with too many YouTube channels, and welcome back to our full card breakdown and prediction for UFC Vegas 75, Vettori versus Cannonier. There are quite a bit of close fights on this card. I'm excited for it. Let's get into the fights. Again, timestamps are there if you would like to use them. Starting off with the first fight, we have Modestas Bukauskas versus Zac Pauga. Now, I'm very interested to see Zac Pauga coming back because we saw him get an okay win in his last fight before losing to Muhammad Usman. And I actually thought he was going to win that fight against Muhammad Usman. But then he came back and we saw the patient striker that he might continue with. It's still like tough to say with this guy because I don't know what his approach is going to be to these fights because he's big, he's powerful, he looks like he's pretty strong. Again, there hasn't been enough on him for me really get a good gauge here. But on the other hand, Modestas, the Baltic Gladiator, coming off of a fantastic win against Tyson Pedro. I thought Tyson Pedro was going to win this fight. I was very high on Tyson Pedro. I like Tyson Pedro a lot. He looked great in that fight. He looked really, really, really good. I don't have and really prediction when these two guys actually end up going against each other. I have a feeling that Modestas will be the more technical guy in there, but Zac Pauga's strong. He's big. The stats are like kind of similar. There's nothing too much to really take a look at there. I don't know. And you never know if Zac Pauga's going to wrestle too. We haven't seen him wrestle in a couple fights, but still. A little bit of a tricky fight to break down, but I will go with Modestas to win this fight. Moving on to the next fight, and this one's going to be interesting because you don't typically see two grapplers going at each other too often anymore, like guys that are just like absolutely primarily grapplers. We have Ronnie Lawrence taking on Daniel Argueta. Now, Ronnie Lawrence coming into the UFC, I saw him in LFA, and man, this dude, I was very high on him. I loved to watch his grappling, and then he came off the Contender Series in the UFC, got a couple really nice wins, but then in his last fight, unfortunately, he didn't look really good at all. He had his own game plan kind of work against him, which was very interesting to see. You could argue that maybe it's because it's the first time he was fighting somebody that has a pressure style of a more of a sambo base, or the opponent was just really good. So that's a really tough way to look at it because it's the first time we've ever seen him deal with something like that, and he's going to deal with this same kind of fighter again, although not with really the sambo game plan. It's going to be more of a wrestling approach. Daniel Argueta is actually very good in himself, coming off of a great win. But before that, I don't like the loss to Damon Jackson here. Damon Jackson's okay, but I'm not too high on the guy. You know what I mean? But before that, solid wins. Again, coming from LFA, I like them both. I really do. It's interesting because this one's more of a 50-50 fight for me because they'll both have the same game plan. And I'm almost leaning towards Daniel because we've seen him deal with pressure that Ronnie hasn't. But then again, Ronnie could have just had a bad night. Ronnie could have just gotten out-wrestled. Maybe he'll improve himself a little bit and then out-wrestle Daniel. This is really, really tough fight to pick. If you had a gun to my head, I'd probably lean towards the side of Daniel. But this is a 50-50 fight in my opinion. I have no clue who's going to win this one. I am very interested in watching. Moving on to the next fight, we have Tereza Bleda versus Gabriella Fernandes. Now, this one's actually going to be interesting because both fighters are coming off of a little bit of a rough loss, obviously, but before that, having a really nice win streak. So, Bleda coming off of a loss to Natalia Silva. What the fun fact about this fight is both fighters were looking fantastic until their last fight, and they lost, both of them, to fighters with a lot of hype. You have this loss against Natalia Silva, who has been looking fantastic. A lot of people are believing like it could be a title contender at some point. And you also have the loss of Jasmine, which it just got proven last weekend how much of a serious contender she really is. Looked great. Out-wrestled Miranda Maverick. Now, in this fight, Fernandes got out-wrestled, but now we can look at that loss and we can kind of think, hey, you know what? Maybe she lost to somebody who is a really good wrestler. So that's a little tough to say, and I apologize if you could just hear my phone. I'll mute it after this. But it's tough because Gabriella Fernandes just got controlled, and Tereza has that game plan of coming in and controlling. But Gabriella is strong, powerful, has BJJ in the back pocket, and is a very powerful striker for the division. She's not necessarily undersized, but she's going to be a little bit smaller, but she's probably going to be stronger. This is a toughie. I'm actually leaning towards Gabriella Fernandes, Because again, we did see this little bit of a rough loss in a KO. She got KO'd last time, but then again, you look at the opponent. That's why it's a tough fight. I hope you guys understand what I'm saying. I liked Gabriella. She didn't get destroyed in her last loss. She got controlled. If she can get that under control against Bleda here, I think Gabriella might win the fight by a little bit here. She might be stronger. She's going to be more experienced. It's a tough fight to pick, but I am leaning towards the side of Gabriella Fernandes to win this fight. But again, WMA, anything could happen. Moving on to the next fight, we have Felipe Bunes versus Zhalgas Zhumagulov. Now, I have been excited to see the UFC debut of Bunes because I have been watching him in LFA, recently getting 2 very, very nice wins. This guy has an all-round game with a BJJ, I would say being his base. I'm excited to see him. So when you have a UFC debut, it's always something you need to worry about a little bit. Is it going to affect him? Is the moment going to get to him? Anything like that. He is taking on Zhalgas Zhumagulov, who, if you haven't seen him fight before, do not let his record fool you. You could argue he's coming off of 2 wins here because those judges have both kind of screwed him out of a split decision. It wasn't like he deserved these wins. It was just very, very close fights that he had, that both of these fights you could consider to be a win for him. So it's tough. You could say that, like, I wouldn't look at him coming in, okay, he's won 1 of his last 5. You know what I mean? He's a good fighter. It just, the judges didn't happen to go this way. And this is something that nobody's talking about that I think you need to really pay attention to, is Zhalgas has been openly critical about the judges, very angry at them, saying that he's going to retire, stuff like that. When you're bashing the judges this much, I'm one who believes that the judges will be more likely to do it to you again. Like the people who are always like, hey, the judges don't know what they're talking about. The judges are idiots, blah, blah. I feel like that the judges will continue to do that to you. Screw you out of a decision if it's close. That's honestly something I believe you need to take into consideration if this does end up going to a decision. Zhalgas has been, like, I'm not saying, it's tough because I understand his frustration, but at the same time, you got to watch your mouth, okay? He can't leave this into the judges, but his game plan is to take you down, ground and pound you, submit you if possible, then go to the decision and win a decision. That might not happen. That's something to think about. However, Felipe Bunes, a lot of people are picking Zhalgas to win this fight, and I am picking him as well. I feel like he'll go in there, get the takedowns, just do what he usually does. But Felipe Bunes, I would not count him out. He's very, very underrated striking. He looked very good in LFA despite his record. I think he is a good fighter and has a lot of potential. He could snatch up a submission in this fight, but I think Zhalgas will ultimately be able to avoid everything that's been coming so far. Very interesting fight. Tough debut for Felipe Bunes, but I am going to pick Zhalgas to win this fight. But if it goes to decision, who knows? Moving on to the next fight, we have Carlos Hernandez versus Denys Bondar. Now, Denys Bondar is very, very fun to watch. Something to note before we get into it is Denys is coming off of a loss. However, I can't remember exactly what the injury was, but he broke his arm or something like that. There was a scramble going on, and I don't remember the specifics of the injury, but something really bad happened to his arm, and he had to quit. Okay, so he didn't necessarily, like, it wasn't, it's tough because it wasn't really too much going on in that fight. It's tough to say. You could say before that, though, coming into the UFC, he's been looking very good. He's one of those wrestling-based styles. Very, very fun to watch on the feet. High pressure. He's taking on Carlos Hernandez, who came out of the LFA. If you don't know, I love watching LFA. I'm a big fan of watching the prospects on the come up. That's why I get so excited for these prelims, because there's a lot of these guys that I already get to know. You know what I mean? So Carlos Hernandez, long time coming to the UFC, has looked good on the Contenders Series coming into the UFC and got a very nice win over a hyped up Victor Altamirano here. Excuse me, my apologies. But then ran into a submission loss, which was a little bit surprising to see because he is a submission specialist. The problem is submissions in BJJ is pretty much his only tool he uses to win fights, and it's looked good and worked for him so far, except in his last fight. He's taken on a guy in Denys Bondar who I believe, and I'm going to pick Denys Bondar, but there's a little bit of an asterisk to that. Bondar should out-wrestle him if that were to happen, if the grappling exchanges were to come, but Denys Bondar also will come in with wild, powerful strikes and heavy pressure. The possibility for Hernandez to snatch up a submission is always there and reverse him, especially if Denys starts getting a wild. But I believe in this matchup, the wrestling will beat the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And on the feet, Denys is powerful, wild, and Hernandez probably won't be able to keep up with it. That's my guess, but the reason, and I would bet on this fight, But the reason that I'm not is because Denys Bondar is coming off of a very long layoff. Like, I want to say his arm did break. I can't remember exactly, and I apologize. I don't know if that's a lack of professionalism. But he's coming off of a big injury over a year ago. I don't like that. If everything was okay and this loss didn't happen, I understand that's like really going into the what ifs here. But if this loss and the injury never happened and the long layoff, I'd be picking Bondar all day and I would be betting on it. The thing that's stopping me is that. I'm still going to go with Denys Bondar, but I understand he might not come in the same guy. What if, too, if you have a huge arm injury in grappling, like, you got to think like the mental aspects that can go to it. What if they end up on the ground and he starts like, okay, I got to worry about my arm, got to worry about my arm, got to worry about my arm, bang, he's in a triangle, you know? That stuff can happen, and I don't believe he is the guy. His nickname's Psycho. I don't believe he will be worrying about it. I think he'll be okay. But that's the reason I'm staying away from it. But I am going to pick Bondar to win this fight. Moving on to the next fight, Kyung Ho Kang versus Cristian Quinonez. Now, it's been a little bit while since we have seen both of these fighters. I believe it's been a little bit while, 10 months and 8 months. Okay, so Cristian coming into the UFC, looking very good. Very, very, very fun style. However, it is a risky style. So when you're breaking down one of these fights, you got to understand the potential is there for him to just get cracked at any moment, because his style is to come in, swing like crazy. While it's not like completely wild, it's like he does have technique in what he does. It's just he gets excited and you could see him like having fun with the fight, going in there, making things wild, getting in there and just like putting on as much pressure as possible. He strike with you, take you down. He is non-stop come forward, and it's worked for him so far. He's taking on Kyung Ho Kang, who is coming off of an okay decision win, but before that, I'm not overly impressed by him, to be honest with you. Lost to Ronnie Yaya, where this same style that Cristian has could be a problem. I'm not saying they have the exact same style. I'm saying like Ronnie Yaya did find success with the wrestling and the pressure, so that's something to consider, and that's one of the reasons why, spoiler alert, I'm picking Cristian in this fight. But before that, it's 2 split decisions he's coming off of, and it was a long time ago, I understand, but still, the path to victory for him. And Kyung Ho Kang does have decent boxing. You know what? He's not a good all-round fighter. But I believe like he does have a decent enough boxing where the possibility is there that he could put a stop to the pressure that Cristian puts on. But I don't think it will be enough. It hasn't really failed him as of recent right now. I'm going to pick Cristian to win this fight. I think he'll just do what he wants. I don't know if he'll be able to finish it. Has he had any finishes recently? Yeah, I guess the last fight was one, right? It's tough. It's tough to pick like how this fight's going to go, but I do believe Cristian, the pressure will get to Kyung Ho Kang, and I believe Cristian Quinonez is going to win this fight. Moving on to the next fight's a little bit of an interesting one. We have Jimmy Flick is back versus Alessandro Costa. Jimmy Flick looked horrible in his last fight, and that's kind of why I'm like, oh no, because this fight was the return after a long time. Yeah, it was almost 3 years off. Last fight against Cody Durden came back, but Charles Johnson is somebody that I'm very high on. I understand that he's been struggling as of recent, but Charles Johnson I'm very, very, very high on as a fighter. No shame in losing to that dude. Alessandro Costa, though, also coming off a loss in somebody who there is no shame in losing to, Almir Albazi. So that always makes for an interesting fight. I believe when these two match up, though, because they're both like decently well-rounded, Alessandro Costa is one of those guys that does have very nice power for flyweight. And I don't still trust Jimmy Flick coming back after so long and necessarily being the same fighter that got all of these wins here. It's tough. It's a very, very tough fight to pick because I have a lot of questions about Jimmy Flick. It should be a closer fight than the odds are saying, but I can see Alessandro Costa knocking him out. He has very nice combinations, very accurate, and very, very, very powerful. Again, it's tough to judge these guys by their last loss because there are asterisks to it, but I do think Costa will find the knockout in this fight. Moving on to the next fight, we have Raoni Barcelos versus Miles Johns. Now, Barcelos is a huge favorite, but honestly, I think this is kind of like a 50-50 fight, guys. I really do. Barcelos coming off of a really, really rough loss against Umar Nurmagomedov, but that's Umar Nurmagomedov, and we finally saw his chin go. It's something you got to worry about. He's 36 years old now, getting up there, been fighting in the toughest division in the UFC by far, so that's something to consider. Sometimes we see people's chins go at some point, and that could be that time. He's fighting somebody in Miles Johns who has a similar style to Umar Nurmagomedov, but I wouldn't say, like, he's not as good, and it's not Sambo, of course, it's wrestling style, and he can do both, Miles Johns. He's a very, very powerful striker. It's tough because Miles Johns sometimes comes in with a wrestling game plan, sometimes he comes in with a striking game plan. You never really know what you're going to get with him. He's looked good, but he ended up with 2 losses in his last 5, recently coming off of an okay win, though. And in that win, I could see him, if he comes in with the styleable striking and wrestling, coming in with that Barcelos. But the problem is Barcelos has very, 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 very good submissions. If Miles Johns wants to take him down, I could see him getting choked out. But at the same time, in the bantamweight division, I'm always hesitant to pick somebody who is like over 35 years old. I don't trust Barcelos to win. I believe Barcelos might be the better fighter here, but Miles Johns does have very nice power. And how long ago was it? Yeah, it was 4 months ago he got KO'd. Honestly, guys, if you had a gun to my head, I would pick Miles Johns, but I think this is more of a 50-50 fight. If you're looking for an underdog, I don't mind Miles Johns at all. Moving on to the next fight, we have the return of Muslim Salikhov versus Nicolas Dalby. I enjoy watching Muslim fight. I really, really enjoy it. Now, Muslim Salikhov coming off of a fantastic win. Fantastic win against Andre Fialho. We got a really, really, really nice knockout. Looking good. A lot of hype on him. Nicolas Dalby looked very good in his last 2 wins before his loss against Tim Means, where actually he didn't look good. But that was 1 year, almost 2 years ago. Both of these guys are up there in age, so it's always tough to pick these fights because, again, you never really know, especially at a division like welterweight. I know that's not necessarily like flyweight, bantamweight like I was talking about the last fight, but these two are slowing down. And I believe that Muslim Salikhov is slowing down less. He's looked good recently. He has some momentum. I know he does have 1 loss here against Jingliang Li. There was a tough fight. The Li Jingliang is pretty good. He's pretty good. And there's not like a lot of any shame in losing to him. You know what I mean? You could lose to better guys. You lost a fight. I'm still really high on him because I can see Nicolas Dalby. He pretty much wants to just keep this fight striking. Muslim Salikhov does have the striking and the all-round game. He can take this fight to pretty much, I imagine him being able to dictate where this fight goes. If he gets in trouble with the pressure, go for a takedown. Otherwise, that power will be live. I'm picking Muslim Salikhov to win this fight, and I'm like decently confident in saying so. Moving on to the next fight, guys. Honestly, I think I got another 50-50 fight here. Like I said, there are a lot of good fights on this card. Nikolas Motta versus Manuel Torres. 2 guys a lot of people in the hardcore MMA community are really, really high on. Both guys have looked really good, except Motta coming into the UFC. Had a not-so-great loss to Jim Miller. But Jim Miller's been taking out people, man. Jim Miller's has had a second resurgence in his career. So how much can you really consider that and, like, really knock him for it? Not like a lot of people would look at an old guy in Jim Miller and be like, oh, man, you lost to that dude. But it's Jim Miller. So it's tough. We've seen him get chinned. That's the whole point. Manuel Torres, on the other hand, will probably want to have this fight to the ground. But he is a very nice all-around fighter, just like Nicolas Motta. I would give probably a little bit of striking and definitely a power advantage to Motta. Manuel Torres, it's tough to pick because he could come into this fight and have a grappling base, try to take you down, try to submit you, maybe even like, it's tough. Like looking at this fight, I have such a problem breaking it down. Manuel Torres has a way of making fights dirty, and we have seen Motta get chinned decently recently. So I'm like, that could always happen, but then Motta will probably be more powerful. So I don't know. Again, another 50-50 fight, man. I'm excited to see this one. This one has potential to be the best fight on the card. If you had a gun to my head, man, I'd have to pick Torres. But I'm not sure one little bit on this fight. This is a fight you should absolutely not bet on, in my opinion. Stay far away from it. Moving on to the next fight, in another very, very interesting fight, we have Pat Sabatini versus Lucas Almeida. This fight should be very fun. Potential for fight of the night here, okay, guys? So, Pat Sabatini coming off of a not-so-great loss against Damon Jackson. Very quick fight. There's not much to say about it. He got chinned. That's pretty much all there is to say. But before that, he looked great. Looked really good. And something interesting about TJ Laramie is he was able to outgrapple TJ Laramie, and I had the privilege of rolling with TJ Laramie a few times. The dude is an absolute animal on the ground. So I was like, coming into this fight, and I was like, oh, TJ Laramie's fighting. I'm kind of excited for this. And then Pat Sabatini just did what he did and got a really, really nice win. So I was a little bit high on him, but then he ended up getting chinned against Damon Jackson. Lucas Almeida, on the other hand, is, despite the last name, a very, very powerful striker. He pretty much is an only striker. That's where I worry, because Pat Sabatini at least has a little bit of an all-round game. Lucas Almeida You could say, I like to use this word a lot, where it's calculated chaos, where he has no problem just throwing caution to the wind. Or the problem is with the term calculated chaos, because he has no problem making the fight dirty, going crazy, throwing wild, but at the same time, he's very aware and not just swinging. He will just, he'll find his shots, he'll be a little bit patient while making the fight extremely chaotic. Does that make sense? That's what I mean when I say calculated chaos. Like, I like to think of Dustin Poirier as like the definition of calculated chaos. The fight IQ was very, very nice in the striking, but makes it very chaotic and troublesome for his opponents. That's what I mean when I'm talking about calculated chaos, and with Lucas Almeida here. Tough fight, because I'm leaning towards Lucas Almeida to win this fight, but Pat Sabatini does have some serious ground skills. He'll want the fight at the ground, and Lucas Almeida does not want the fight at ground one bit. I can see Lucas Almeida chinning him just like Pat Sabatini did in his last fight, but you can't just say that because he just got chinned in his last fight, because he looked amazing before that. We haven't seen him get chinned. I'm like 60-40 on this fight, on the side of Lucas Almeida. I think he will find that knockout win, and Pat Sabatini will be on a 2-fight skid, both getting KO'd. Moving on to the next fight, guys. I know I keep saying this. There's just a lot of fun fights on this card. Leroy Duncan versus Armen Petrosyan. Now, this could be fight of the night. So both of these guys are very, very good strikers, looking for the kill the whole time. I would say Armen would have the advantage on the ground slightly, but Leroy Duncan would have more tools on the feet to win the fight. Both guys will be chasing for I would imagine this will be a striking matchup. Leroy Duncan has been just going for it, and he's undefeated so far, been looking fantastic. I've seen his highlights. Very, very, very impressive fighter. But he hasn't fought anybody to the name of Armen Petrosyan yet. And Armen Petrosyan, if you don't know, he is a very good fighter in himself. While he hasn't fought or broken into the rankings or anything like that, his record is very good, fighting a bunch of really good guys. And even his losses, you can't really... Kai Barhallo, that's a good loss to have, man. It's a good loss. Coming off, and he's a guy that just destroyed I don't know why I said destroyed. Had a very, very good fight against Gregory Rodriguez, and had a loss after that, like I said. But then AJ Johnson, he came back and looked even better. The tough fight to pick. Tough fight to pick. Leroy Duncan does seem more vicious with his tools, and that's why I'm kind of going to pick him. I can see Armen. While Armen does have a decent chin, I think he's going to eat too many shots there. And the only thing that worries me is Leroy Duncan hasn't fought anybody of significance. You know? He's looked good so far. Looked fantastic. And I'm picking him to win. But that worries me a little bit. Let's see what happens when he gets to this level of competition. We just seen that with Blake Builder last weekend. I understand that Blake Builder didn't even fight anybody like of significance, really. So I'm kind of looking at this the same way. How good is he really? He's looked good so far, but I'm not convinced he's the next big thing yet. A lot of people are really hyped on him. I am going to pick him to the win. When I'm betting, though, I'm going to stay far away from this. This is going to be a wild fight, likely fight of the night, like I mentioned. Moving on to the co-main event, the return of Armen Tsarukyan versus Joaquim Silva. Now, guys, I'm not going to lie. There is not much to say about this fight. Armen Tsarukyan is a minus 1,000 favorite, and I believe it's well-deserved. Just take his resume in his last two fights specifically. He beat and controlled Damir Ismagulov, who is one of the most underrated fighters in the UFC. He is so good. He's amazing, Damir Ismagulov. And before that, you could argue that he won against Mateusz Gamrot. One of the most technical, fun fights that I've seen in my life was against Mateusz Gamrot. I believe Armen won that fight, but it was very close. This dude is going to come in Joaquim Silva with a spotty record as of recently. Fun fact, pretty much all knockouts. And, you know, like, he wins, he loses, he wins, he loses. That's been his UFC story so far. Joaquim Silva, the only chance that he has in this fight is he can chin Armen. He has that power where that can happen. And typically, I'd be like, oh, okay, Armen Tsarukyan, lock of the week, you know? Put him on your parlays. But it's not even worth it because he's a minus 1,000 favorite. The potential's there, man. I'm telling you. Silva has serious power. The only way he can win this fight, like I said, is if he catches him. Just one shot happens to put him out, and it ended up being like one of those fights. You know what I mean? Other than that, Armen should do what he wants. I believe he'll stay out of the danger, even if like Silva does have good BJJ. I think Armen's wrestling and ground control will just completely dominate. He's going to do his thing, and I believe Armen's going to win this fight. I'm so high on this dude, and like everybody else, the minus 1,000 favorite is justified in my opinion. I got Armen. Like, there's not much else to say, man. Moving on to the main event, we have Marvin Vettori versus Jared Cannonier. Marvin Vettori coming off of a win in Roman Dolidze, which I personally thought he got robbed, but I understand that's a little bit of an unpopular opinion. I thought Roman won this fight, and not many people were really talking about it. Some people were with me, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. He's coming off of a win. Before that, of course, got destroyed by Robert Whittaker. So Marvin Vettori is one of those fights. If you take a look at all of those guys, he'll beat anyone that is like not Robert Whittaker or Israel Adesanya. Like, you know how they say like Max Holloway and Volkanovski in their division is they're separate, like Colby and Usman. You know, there's those two fighters in the division, number one contender and the champion, who are just on a different level than the rest of the division. Marvin won't beat those guys, but he'll beat everybody else. That's why I'm picking him to beat Jared Cannonier. Jared Cannonier, while he is coming off of a split decision to Sean Strickland, like Marvin Vettori, I actually believe that was a robbery. I thought Sean Strickland won that fight clear as day. I really did. But before that, of course, looked absolutely horrible against Israel Adesanya, and I wasn't impressed in this performance against Sean Strickland either. Jared Cannonier is 39 years old at this point. Marvin Vettori just entering his prime. And while we don't see a lot of improvement in Marvin Vettori in his fights, it's kind of like the same story. He'll come in, has a granite chin. He'll come in, heavy pressure, try to wrestle, try to strike. Everything's just good. He doesn't do anything like really, really special. Actually, the best thing about him, in my opinion, is his chin. Have you seen those shots that Paulo Costa was throwing at him? Israel Adesanya was nailing him some nice shots. Robert Whittaker was hitting him with the hardest shots in the world. And he just stands there and eats it like nothing happens. The day's coming, like Drew Dober. The day's coming where Marvin Vettori is going to get chin and he's going to get knocked out. I don't believe that day is today, though. Jared Cannonier in recent times has looked slow and pretty much only relied on his power. I believe this fight with Marvin Vettori, and I'm going to be betting on this fight, Marvin Vettori will come in, and this fight will look a lot like the Paulo Costa fight. Jared Cannonier will find some shots here and there, but ultimately Marvin will be faster. He'll have heavy pressure. I'm not 100% if Marvin will end up taking this to the ground, but I believe Marvin will just be like a solid step ahead the entire time. I don't like Jared Cannonier anymore, like fighting this division at 39 years old. He is clearly slowing down, and all he really has right now is his power. And I don't believe that power is going to affect Marvin Vettori one little bit. He's way too stubborn. He wants to get back to the belt. He still believes that he can be a champion, so he's coming into the prime of his career, man. I cannot believe that Marvin Vettori is only a minus 150 favorite. I am definitely going to be betting on this fight. I got Marvin Vettori, guys. I got Marvin Vettori, and I'm very confident in saying so. But guys, that is going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what your picks are down below, and a betting video will be coming out later this week, placing my official bets and showing you guys what I am doing with my actual money. I'll put my money where my mouth is when I'm talking about this fight. There's a lot of close fights, and I'm only going to probably bet. It's going to be a light week of betting. But regardless, let me know what your picks are down below, guys. And thank you so much for watching this video. On the screen right now, we have two fantastic Clembat videos. If you want to continue watching the channel, check them out, guys. I will see you there or in the next video. Take care.